Okay, so we have a new client that we're working with now. The company's called Northern Dynasty Minerals, NDM. NDM is the ticker symbol. If you look at the stock chart, you won't find anything that makes you think, wow, this is something I've got to jump on right now before it goes off to the races. There's a problem with Northern Dynasty Minerals' Pebble project. The problem isn't that there isn't copious amounts of gold and copper there to be had. In fact, it's recognized as the largest undeveloped gold and copper project in the world. The project is not hampered by a lack of cash. In fact, cash injection has been put into the company to the tune of $60 million. And the problem isn't that the guys that run it don't know how to put a mine together. There's plenty of experience, plenty of people there. The problem comes in the previous management of the company had, when dealing with environmentalists and indigenous folks, claimed that they were going to just make a small footprint. It was just going to be a little dig. They were going to look out for the environment. They were going to do everything they could to make sure that this was almost unnoticeable on the environmental landscape. Unfortunately, the CEO then took an interview with some environmentalists posing as investors, and privately, we're going to blow the roof off this thing, which caused all manner of panic and problem and refusal and rejection. So fast forward now, you've got new management in place, and you've got a process the Environmental Protection Agency has to justify whether there's going to be a mine or not. You've got to make sure that you're not going to destroy the environment. You're not going to needlessly harass the flora and fauna. You're going to be sure that you're going to take into consideration the potential harm that could come with a project that goes in the middle of what is a pristine landscape. Okay, so the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does their environmental impact, says, you know what, this thing can be done without any harm to the fisheries, without any harm to the environment. Other groups, the Alaskan government, they want this thing done. There's various permitting processes that have been gone through and achieved. But the EPA has decided that, you know what, there is potential for the environment to be harmed here, that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers doesn't believe exists, and so they've rejected the permit. Now, this is an interesting thing, this process, because a lot of what happens in the U.S. in terms of getting mines up and running is political. You're not just going out there and saying, is there stuff under the ground? You're saying to the local community, hey, do you want a mine and the ensuing jobs? You're saying to the indigenous folks, hey, this is your land too. Like, what can we do to make this right for everybody? You're saying to environmentalists, here are the plans that we have in place to ensure that we aren't going to go and just turn this thing into a toxic nightmare. Modern day mining, look, I get it. I get it that, you know, people don't want necessarily a mine on their front door. People are concerned that a mine will needlessly harm the environment in ways that it shouldn't. And in the past, yeah, that's been the case. Certainly in the third world, it's still the case, unfortunately. But a mine on US lands that is overseen by the EPA, by various government agencies, by the state, by local government, that's a whole different thing. You know, you're not going out there and just filling a river with mercury. It's not the way it happens these days. So mining is much more responsible today than it used to be. Is it perfect? Would you want it in your backyard? Not without a large amount of money coming back. And that's where this gets interesting, because Northern Dynasty is not on its haunches. It hasn't been rejected, face pumped into the dirt. Stock chart isn't great, but the company remains active and remains dragging in new investment. Recently brought in $60 million in cash, presumably from folks who think that there is a better than good chance that a deal can be struck to make this Pebble project permitted, approved, and get it into process. Now, it could just be that $60 million is a billionaire's idea of rolling the dice on roulette, and if he loses, then oh well. But it could also be that there's some inside knowledge here that, you know what, this EPA decision that's been made to reject this thing isn't on strong legal grounds. Now, the company itself has put out a statement that is probably a little bit more attacking of the EPA than I would have thought responsibly politically. It's not overly diplomatic, but maybe the time for diplomacy has passed. In part, it says Congress did not give the EPA broad authority to act as it has in the Pebble case. The veto it used was intended to be narrowly defined and for specific areas In this case, the EPA has preemptively vetoed 309 square miles, nearly 200,000 acres of state of Alaska land, an area 66 times larger than any previous 404 veto. In fact, the site prohibition is 23 times larger than the entire mine site footprint, which the company says is clearly a massive regulatory overreach and well outside what Congress intended. Now, that's true. I've done a little looking into it, and it's true that the veto that's normally used by the EPA to reject a mine plan is normally much, much smaller than this. And in this case, the EPA has basically said, we're creating a new national park. We're creating a large enough area where nothing can happen that is on the scale of a national park. And so the company is saying, look, if we have to, we're going to go to court. If we have to, we're going to go out there and we're going to start throwing slings and arrows, and we're going to see if we can get this thing overturned. If not by the EPA, which should be the case, then by larger bodies. And this actually is an interesting ploy, because recently the Supreme Court in the US announced that the EPA had much smaller powers than it has been traditionally using in an unrelated case, but basically said the EPA doesn't have the power to just go out there and do large-scale rejection of industry. Now, I ain't no big city lawyer, so I can't tell you if that's part of what the Northern Dynasty guys are planning here. But what I can say is that the project itself is a GDP-sized, like a GDP influencer-sized project. If it was to get up and running, the amount of minerals that are under the ground, the amount of potential revenue to come out the other side would be large enough that this would be an impact on the United States GDP. Now that's interesting. So to me, if I put $3 or $4 grand down on stock today at 30 cents, it's 52-week low. And in a year's time or 2 years' time, this thing goes through the courts and the EPA loses. I can't even predict what the multiples would be on the back of that small few $1,000 investment. Now, I'm not going to tell you that if you invest in it today, you're going to take profit out in 10 days or 30 days or even 6 months. Like, this thing may be 20 cents in a month's time. It may be 12. I don't know. What I'm telling you right now is that the current share price of this thing makes it really interesting. It's still a $169 million market cap today with a rejected mine plan, right? That tells you the size of this thing. If it's worth $160 million unpermitted, if it gets permitted, can you imagine how many digits get added to the back of that? Now, I haven't talked to the company yet. I haven't done my initial interview with the CEO. All I've done is look at what's out there. All I've done is try and figure out what is it that these guys are up to? What is it these guys think they can pull off? Is it worth the market cap today, or is it potentially worth much more? I will tell you that there are people that are invested in this thing purely as a dice roll. It's a roulette wheel. Maybe it'll never come up. Maybe it'll never be approved. But there are enough people out there that I trust that think that the EPA has overreached on this thing, that if the company itself can get its lobbying and its courtroom side of the business really moving in the way that it should, that there could be a really interesting outcome here. Now, if it were me, if I were running the company, I don't know that I'd be going to court just yet. I don't know that I'd be going and killing the EPA in print just yet. I might go to the small groups, the communities that are out there, and say, okay, what's it going to take? I might go to the indigenous guys and say, how much do I have to deal you in on this project? How many seats at the board do we need to give you so that you have oversight? I might say to the environmentalists that we'll set up a fund where if there is any sort of damage to the environment, that fund is sitting right there waiting to be used, and that there'd be no concern about whether the company would pay its bill. There are all sorts of things that could be done to make the various parties involved in this thing happy. The company has decided to go for the bulldozer side of things, to go legal, to go political, and to tell the EPA that it doesn't know what it's doing. Interesting tactic. Let's see how that goes for them. It may well turn out that there's enough will at the state level and even maybe at the federal level to get this mine up and running in the next few years. And if it does, this is a mammoth when I talk to the company, I'll see if there's any more detail I can add, but that's what I think right now. I don't know, I'm looking at NDM and I'm thinking maybe now's a good time.